The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
And you're going to love it.
Okay, let's go.
I mean, honestly, it's just something different when you see the uniform. It really is. And so I really appreciate you kind of making that happen for my request. All right, everybody, listen, I am very excited today to have this conversation, and it's been one we've been trying to put together for, a few weeks now. And we are going to talk today to former Captain Josephine Guilbeau. Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
That's right.
All right. Let me do this. And by the way, you guys know, obviously this podcast is a video podcast. If you're on Spotify, you can watch this on video. It's also on YouTube. And really, mainly because, man, we've got a decorated 17-year Army veteran that has taken time out of her schedule to kind of talk to us about a lot of things. So let me read this little blurb I found on you to kind of set the stage. And it says, Josephine Guilbeau is a former U.S. Army all-source intel analyst. Her mobilizations include Operation Enduring Freedom, where she supported cyberspace operation for the U.S. Cyberspace Command, and the Cyber National Mission Force, earning an Army Commendation Medal for her vital role in the mission success. Since her resignation from the military in 2023, Josephine has been advocating for peace in the Middle East, upholding the highest standards of professionalism and leadership. Her dedication to both her military duties and her community reflects her strong sense of duty and commitment to making a positive impact wherever she serves. Guilbeau earned a Bachelor of Science degree in criminal justice, and she's currently pursuing a master's degree in cybersecurity management and policy. Her awards and decorations include 2 Army Commendation Medals and 3 Army Achievement Medals, recognizing her outstanding service and valor in the face of adversity. That is pretty awesome. And, it's interesting when I meet people in the military, I always obviously thank them for their service. Some people like that. Some people don't like that. But regardless, I'm going to thank you for your service and welcome. Anyway, listen, I really appreciate you taking the time. And, first of all, I think it'll be just fascinating for you to share with us just kind of your journey. And, what was it like being in the Army for 17 years?
Yeah. So, I am born and raised in Louisiana. My father was also a veteran, and we grew up in a somewhat lower income family. And so, as many people do join the military for economic reasons, we call it in the military the economic draft. It's basically why I joined the military, to be able to have college paid for. So that was back in 2006. And I started off as a combat medic, and then I eventually went on to get my degree and went to OCS and became an intelligence officer. And from there, I worked at several agencies, like the DIA. I was at NSA for about 5 years. OD&I worked for a short amount of time. And I decided to get out actually because of the Ukrainian war. I had a good friend of mine that had received a warning order to provide a level of echelon care in Poland. And I said, wait, that's just too close to the border of Ukraine. I didn't agree that we should be going to war with Russia. I thought there was definitely a diplomatic way to, come to terms with what was going on there. I don't think we should have ever gotten involved with that. We've used Ukraine as a proxy to degrade Russian capabilities and resources. And in turn, the Ukrainians have lost probably an entire generation of men. And it just really affected me. So I got out at 17 years. That's why there's this weird 17 years instead of 20. And more recently...
Wow. Let me ask something really quick. So when you talk about Ukraine, you're saying the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, right? Like, do you have, I guess, a knowledge base or experience with, like, the stuff that even happened in 2014 where,
Yeah.
we
Annexation of
overthrew Viktor
Crimea.
Yanukovych and all that?
Yeah, I'm familiar with what happened with the annexation of Crimea. I understand what even was taking place before 1994, where the treaty was signed with the Soviet Union to release Ukraine. So I did have some historical context of what was going on there. But more importantly, I knew that Ukraine did not stand a chance to go against a conventional force like Russia. Um, and I felt like that was just a death sentence, that we were going to support Ukraine in doing that instead of coming up with a diplomatic solution, that if we hadn't been pushed for that, an entire generation of Ukrainians would still be alive. And I just felt like at the time, which I've been validated in feeling that way years later, that we were just going in to use Ukraine as a proxy. So I got out of the military, and that was February of 2023. Well, from a previous assignment when I worked for DIA, doing work with the detainees in Guantanamo Bay, I was an intelligence analyst for a litigation team. I was privy to certain documentation that made me a little bit more aware of the reality of what our our Department of Defense was capable of. And I started following other media outlets from other countries and regions within our planet, really, Europe, Indo-Pacific, Africa, the Middle East. So, up until this point, I had been receiving and feeding myself with information from Western media, from my own Department of Defense intelligence reports. And for the first time, I took the step to get the perspective of the people within these regions. And this was back in 2017. But when October 7th happened, I was following these media outlets, and I could literally see the footage with my own eyes of what was transpiring inside of Gaza. And I was comparing it with what we were being told here inside of America. And I knew almost immediately that we were being totally lied to.
Wow, that is very interesting. Let me ask you a couple things. First of all, backing up to where, you spent 5 years with the NSA. I mean, what is that like? Like, what is the NSA doing on a daily basis, and what is their, I guess, role in our security and just overall in the United States?
Yeah, well, the team that I was a part of, if you understand cybersecurity from even just like a basic level, you have a red team, you have red space, gray space, blue space, and it just means that blue space is from our borders in, gray space is just sort of everything in between, and then red space is like the enemy, we'll say. So I work primarily in the blue space. So no matter what happens on the scale of global powers, there's always going to be a bad actor. I believe right now America's the bad actor, but I'm not going to be so blind to say in the future someone else isn't going to be a bad actor. And so it is really important for us to invest in our national security within our borders. And that was something that I helped work on, which was ensuring that our critical infrastructure was secure and vulnerable. I did mainly operational technology, so like electric plants, water treatment facilities, this type of, I guess, cybersecurity perspective is what I mainly focused on. So that's the team I was on, but I mean, there are thousands of employees and projects at NSA, so it's a wide range.
Gotcha. I gotcha. Okay. And like, I have to imagine overall, you hear a lot about a grid attack, and there's going to be a big cyber attack that's going to take out, quote unquote, the grid here in the United States and all that. I just have to imagine the United States is is ready for anything, right? And like, I mean, is something like that even possible? Like, I'm trying to remember there was
Absolutely.
it is
Something like that is
okay.
absolutely possible and absolutely likely. A most likely course of action in the near future is something like that happening. And I will tell you that, yes, the United States invests a lot of talent and money into securing our critical infrastructure. But at the same time, as soon as we recognize one certain vulnerability that exists, our enemies have already discovered 10 more. So it's just like a constant rat race of trying to keep up with the technology advancement and skill and talent that exists in countries like China and North Korea and even Iran and Russia.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Okay. That's interesting. All right. I want to obviously talk a lot about the Gaza stuff because that's how I discovered you. I think I saw you on a clip on, I forget if it was TRT World or somewhere where I believe you were in DC, and you just gave such a, in my opinion, intelligent and honest, take on what was going on. I actually played it on the podcast before. So just give us what you saw. So literally October 7th happens and you start seeing the way the media is portraying it. And it felt weird to you. It felt off. Did it feel like, kind of I don't know if I should use the word false flag, but like, did it feel like a setup in order to, basically allow what's happened since October 7th? Just what was that thought process for you?
Well, at the same time that I'm witnessing an active genocide inside of Gaza, I'm also self-reflecting on my own actions and my own participation in what has now opened my eyes to an American empire that has been causing death and destruction in the Middle East for decades, against innocent people. So there sort of was this twofold sort of happening at the same time where I'm not only watching in real time my country funding the genocide, I'm also waking up to the reality that my country has been funding this type of death and destruction in the Middle East for decades. And so this was really this was difficult for me to wrap my head around and process. And I still think I'm sort of on that journey of processing that because I am very much a patriot of my country. I very much believed in the values and the hypocrisy. I believe the hypocrisy. I believe that I was fighting for my country. I still speak with colleagues now that I know killed people in Iraq that say it was for my country. No, it was not. It wasn't. It was for rich elite people that used us as a pawn. And in that moment, I actually drove from Ohio to DC outside of the Israeli embassy where Aaron Bushnell lit himself on fire to tell us the truth. And so we were having a memorial for him that day. And I went in uniform to pay my respects. I thought for sure that there would be people from his command, other military personnel that would be there as well to show their respects. And I was just so disappointed to see that not only was our government funding this genocide, our military is now also complicit in it and going to try and sweep it under the rug. As you've seen over the past year, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin lying over and over in front of the congressionals and senators about the reality that's happening on the ground. And so in that moment, I spoke from the heart. I don't think anyone is blind to the fact that we have, capabilities inside of our government and military that can do precision strikes inside of Gaza. And that's just not what has happened over the past year. And, it's been indiscriminate bombing of children, and it's on purpose. They're trying to wipe out that population.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, That's heavy, man. That is
It is
heavy.
very
And
heavy.
I can totally understand what you're going through. And, it's interesting. I mean, in a lot of ways, I'm going through that same thing. I think a lot of people are going through that same thing. And really, I will say a lot of times I'll talk about our government, our country, the United States. Fundamentally, the United States is amazing. The people of the United States are amazing. It's it's a very small group of lawmakers that are really kind of spearheading so much of this. And I've talked a lot on the podcast about this starting with like George H.W. Bush, Papa Bush, and the whole neoconservative movement, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, George W. Bush, Paul Wolfowitz, like all these guys. And I think what you said earlier in terms of sort of, I mean, waking up to an extent. What's that? Go ahead. I lost you. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Honestly, I'm afraid to say this has started way before Bush. You know, I have done a lot of digging and research and reading and speaking to historians about this, speaking to, people like Larry Wilkerson, who was an advisor to Colin Powell, Dennis Fritz, a 28-year retired Command Chief Master Sergeant. This started actually before the Bush administration. You see, the State of Israel, when it was formed in 1948, there was always this desire to expand beyond the bounds of just where Palestine existed. And so, as you saw Benjamin Netanyahu testify to our Congress and lie to our Congress, saying that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which is the reason we went in there, these types of lies have been given to our politicians even before the Bush administration. This has been going on now since the Gulf War. The idea to control the Middle East and the resources there have been going on even before our invasion of Iraq.
Wow. Okay. Okay, man, that goes back even further to like the early 90s then. Okay, you know what? Actually, that makes total sense because I think it does coincide to kind of when the Cold War with Russia ended. And basically, it was like, oh shit, we don't have an enemy anymore. We need a boogeyman. We need a big bad wolf. And really, that's when all the craziness in the Middle East started. It was kind of like they went from, Russia being the enemy in the Cold War, or actually at the time, I would say the Soviet Union. And then that ended, and it's like, oh shit, we need an adversary. And then that's when the Middle East stuff started. Man, that is a serious deep dive that I think I'm going to have to go down at some point. Let me ask you this.
If I'm being honest with you, this isn't something that like you can process and absorb overnight. It's a year into a genocide. It's a year into this awakening of the reality of our presence in the Middle East and what we've actually done to these communities and these indigenous people. I'm still absorbing information. It's a lot to take in, especially as a 17-year veteran. It's a lot to take in because you're really having to deprogram yourself from layers and layers of propaganda that we as Americans have been fed our entire lives. So this isn't an easy journey to take. And a lot of people look at the journey up ahead and say, wow, that's so incredibly complex that I don't have the time, effort, or energy to be able to understand that. So I'm just not going to. I feel like that's the hardest hurdle to get across when I'm having these conversations with Americans, that they just don't even have the capacity to absorb the reality of what's happening.
I think you're totally right. I think you're right on everything you said, especially it's complicated, man. It is complicated, and it is like 4-dimensional, 8-dimensional chess on so many different levels. And even everything that's going on now with Trump coming in, and there's so many people that are like, oh, this is amazing, life's going to go back to quote unquote normal. And I'm defining normal as, let's say, before 2016, where all of this stuff was happening. We just never even thought about it, let alone never knew about it. But it is crazy complicated. And you do have to sort of take things, a little bit at a time. And again, I think you, along with everybody else, myself included, all we're trying to do is separate right versus wrong, and just get to the truth, because it is not what we've been told. So, man, that's quite a journey. Let me ask you about, these administrations. Like, obviously, working 17 years in the Army, you've seen, I guess you probably got in, who was president when you joined? Who's
Bush.
President Bush? Okay.
I was in basic training whenever he made an announcement that he would be sending thousands and thousands of more troops into Iraq. This was in 2006. I remember they lined us up in the hallways and they played his speech over the speaker. And basically, we all knew we were going to be most likely going to Iraq.
Let me ask you this. Like when it was happening then, did anybody kind of be like, wait a minute, why are we doing this? And then
no, absolutely not.
Now,
guess what happened?
Okay.
9/11. 9/11 and the following propaganda convinced the people in America that this was something that we absolutely needed to do in order to protect our country. And they had convinced us that if we didn't go there and invade, that these weapons of mass destruction would eventually make their way into our border. So if I'm being honest, in 2006, no, I mean, we were all convinced that we were fighting for our country. Now, not so much. The reality is, with technology and everything that we have, we're watching a live stream genocide. And at the same time, we're watching our government continue to lie to us about it. It's making a lot of veterans go back and realize that these same sort of game moves applied back then to us. And, what I am concerned the most with the reality of this is we already have 22 plus suicides a day. You don't know this, but my father, a veteran, also died by suicide. I watched him battle with Veterans Affairs and veteran health. And it's such a poor system, underfunded system. And the reality is we're about to see a significant increase in veteran suicides, because so many veterans this past year have awakened to what they were a part of and what they participated in. And instead of our government confronting that in order to help the veterans, they're going to continue to push this narrative that they were some sort of hero, when the reality is veterans understand deep down that they're not a hero and that they were used as a pawn for these rich people in order to gain access to more land and resources.
Wow. Oh man, I'm with you. I think this is absolutely kind of where we're at. And I want to shift into this. I feel like everything you said about 9/11 being the catalyst for, we've got a war on terror. Literally talked about this the other day. I think that's happening again. I think like what the year started off with, the New Orleans, attack, and then the guy in the cyber truck in Las Vegas. I think this is the beginning of that second war on terror. What are your thoughts on those two events? Let's talk about those two for a second.
I've been speaking with a lot of different former colleagues and contacts that I have. Earlier today, I've had a conversation with a former State Department official who resigned. I also had a conversation earlier today, as a matter of fact, with a former Pentagon advisor, retired military. Last week, I had a conversation with retired Colonel Larry Wilkerson, and we're having these conversations about these situations. And, there are several theories about what's going on. And one theory is that the government and the Mossad, which is the Israeli intelligence, is realizing that there's a lot of power in the voices of veterans, and a lot of veterans like Colonel McGregor, Colonel Wilkerson, Dennis Fritz wrote a book, The Deadly Betrayal, about Israel's power in us being at war for decades in the Middle East. And myself, Greg Stoker, who's a ranger that does geopolitical analysis, I think they're realizing the power in our voices of speaking the truth. And some people are theorizing that these are false flags to try and discredit veterans' voices and to say that they can be radicalized because of our training and violence, our exposure to violence, if you will. And then I actually take a different approach on thinking about it, because I think that, like I said before, so many veterans are waking up to the reality of what has happened to us, what we continue to do, and they want to be heard. They want to be heard that this is not okay. They want to be heard that we need to stop doing this right now. And like Aaron Bushnell, self-immolating and screaming the truth, like this active duty Green Beret committing suicide and sending an email to Sean Ryan and this other retired warrant chief. If you haven't watched the Sean Ryan episode 155, I encourage you to. He emailed them with information about the war crimes he was a part of in 2019 in Afghanistan. He also warned us about the possibility of the drones on the East Coast being from China as a show of force, if you will, to deter us from continuing our efforts over Taiwan and the Middle East, of course. And, you know, I just feel like we as a country and our government needs to take a really hard look at the reality that veterans are coming to the conclusion that they've participated in war crimes and that they've, you know, sacrificed their consciousness as humans in order to do it. And their consciousness is now reaching up to them and they're having a hard time living with it.
I could imagine that absolutely would be, gosh, I hate when I do something remotely wrong and I have the regrets for it. I can't even comprehend how that would feel. Let me ask you about PTSD. I mean, I know it's real. I know it's a real thing, but like, do you have any experience with it on a personal level if you're comfortable sharing that? And then if not on a personal level, which I hope not, like, I mean, help us understand that is it, and just how powerful that can be. And that kind of plays to what you've been talking about.
Yes, I'm actually diagnosed with PTSD myself. I am currently going through the VA process to be able to get the, you know, help and disability that I should receive. I mean, I don't know how that's going to work because, like I said, I don't have a whole lot of trust in our VA institutions right now, growing up watching my father battle with them back and forth. But, you know, PTSD, it's something that our institutions are not prepared to treat because it is going to take our government being able to recognize and acknowledge and confront the fact that they sent American men and women to do the bidding for rich people and force them to do things based on lies. I think that until the government is prepared to acknowledge that from a true deep-rooted perspective, only then can we start to actually see healing happening amongst the veterans so that they can understand that they were a pawn. They believed what they were told. They believed that they did things, you know, for our country. And now they realize that they didn't. And at the very least, our own country is going to acknowledge that. Until then, the only thing that they really do for us is put us on a bunch of medicine to numb us up. When my father committed suicide,
right.
and I cleaned up his room afterwards, you know, several weeks after I was going through his things, cleaning things up, I found cases and cases of bottles of depression medicine that they were sending my father and pain medicine that they were sending my father because they refused to actually have surgery on the back injury that he had from his time in service. And so they were just sending him all these opioids to take, and then also depression medicine. And this is what they do. They don't actually help us. They just send us a bunch of, depression medicine or anxiety medicine, numb us up, and pain medicine, numb the pain, and then, keep it moving.
That is fascinating. That is fascinating. It's ridiculously, like, just makes you mad, and it's so unfortunate. But I think you're 100% right. And it's funny. I just watched a couple of weeks ago. I watched the documentary on Netflix. Actually, it wasn't really a documentary. It was a series about, I think it was called Painkiller, and it was about the whole Purdue Pharma and just how they completely blitzed the market with OxyContin and all the damage that OxyContin did in terms of just numbing people's pain and then getting them addicted to it. And, how many hundreds of thousands of people died from that, their lives that were altered, the families' lives. It's so sad to hear your father's story. My deepest condolences in that he wasn't, he wasn't helped. It was just like putting a Band-Aid on his problem and enabling him to self-medicate to forget about it. It's just awful. Oh.
And, my story, Ray, is only one of thousands and thousands and thousands. I have no doubt that within the next year, we're going to see a significant increase in veteran suicide. We're going to see an increase in veterans on substance abuse, alcoholism, drugs. We already have a fentanyl issue here. I would not be surprised if we're going to see an increase on veterans dying from fentanyl, because there's no access to the care that's truly needed for veterans here. And this isn't just veterans. We're talking an entire American population that is completely traumatized by watching our government fund a genocide. I mean, we have people who, like myself, are literally traumatized from watching babies getting bombed every single day on live TV. And then we look at our leaders speaking, and they're just in total denial. And it's so traumatizing. And doesn't it just connect so much with what I'm saying about the denial of what veterans have to go through? It's like they just want to diagnose these veterans with PTSD, put them on medicine to numb them up, and deny the fact that they use them as a pawn to go to places like Iraq and Afghanistan. And now we have, troops in Israel to die for the rich man. It's all about maintaining some level of perspective. And the entire American population is awakening to the fact that we don't live in a democracy anymore. We don't have a say anymore. Our politicians lie to us in our face. They use the Western media, in which we all know they control. Now they're trying to ban TikTok. Mitt Romney did a panel with Secretary Anthony Blinken. You can Google it. Mitt Romney and Anthony Blinken speak about TikTok. And they literally say it to our faces that the reason they need to ban TikTok is because there's too much Palestinian content there.
Yeah, I saw that. I think that was like, it was, you're right. It was Mitt Romney and Anthony Blinken, and he literally came out and said it. And I think everyone's like, dude, you literally just said what we all know, but man, you just
shows you how desperate they are, where they don't even have the capacity to keep things secret anymore, but it also shows how programmed and brainwashed the population is to hear that, but then not to really react to it in a way that deters them from making these types of decisions.
No, I hear you. Oh my God. All right. What else? Honestly, I think we're having some connection issues today. So I'm gonna wrap this up, only because I want to do another episode where we get into some real deeper topics. And, I know there's crazy weather in the East Coast and Midwest. So I think that's definitely affecting things. I mean, any parting words for us? First of all, I totally appreciate this. This was such a great start.
Thanks, Ray, for having me on. I guess my final word is a call to veterans and a call to the American people to please wake up to the reality of what's going on. What we're witnessing, this genocide that we're witnessing in Gaza, is directly connected to us here in America. The administration just signed another $8 billion for weapons to Israel when we here don't even have health insurance, or our men are working 60 to 80 hours a week to be able to make it month to month. It's not sustainable, and we need every voice to stand up and speak up against this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, hopefully there'll be more people like Thomas Massey and Rand Paul. Those are kind of the only two guys I think really get it.
Absolutely.
So we'll see. This Trump administration, I mean, it has a lot of people excited, but I don't know if they're excited about the right things. And I don't know if they realize kind of, what potentially could be coming. I'm going to be positive and hope that it is a change for the better. But anyway, we'll see. All right, listen, I really, really appreciate it. I swear to God, I want to talk a lot more. Let's let the weather clear up a little so there's no internet connections. I'd love to have you back on and we can delve into some more topics.
Sounds good, Ray. Thank you.
All right, hang on the line. All right, everybody, more to come with Josephine, and we will talk to you soon.
This episode was brought to you by the new book, Deep Shallow Dive Into You, available now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble in hardcover and paperback. Don't forget to sign up for our new mailing list on our website at deepshallowdive.com.